I want to take a moment now to introduce the panel. We have some very interesting and distinguished members this evening. The first is Ann Vandersteel, who is an extraordinarily charming, intelligent woman in her own right. She's a serious analyst, and I would argue that she is a major influencer. I'll let you determine in what ways when you listen to her this evening. Secondly, we have Lieutenant Colonel retired Daniel Davis, a man who's unique because he served in the 1991 Gulf War with me, saw some remarkable action. He's an artilleryman with a decoration for valor, which you don't see very often because the artillerymen don't get to come to the front, but he was there and never left it. He subsequently served in Iraq and Afghanistan, has his own podcast, Deep Dive. And finally, Nicole Tarantino, who I think as a graduate student at Liberty University is well on her way to becoming an influencer. And we're very anxious to hear her perspective. So the topics this evening I've covered, and we'll start first of all with this issue of borders, migrants, and ultimately the potential impact of borders and illegal migrants on the election. Ann, do you want to start us off with your thoughts?
Certainly. Thank you, Douglas, for the opportunity this evening. It's a pleasure to be with all of the esteemed panel here. And as a lot of people are well aware, Michael Yon and I set out last summer on Operation Burning Edge to look at this border invasion. And it is clearly weaponized human migration on a scale to which the world has never witnessed before. We've never seen mass migration at this size. And, seeing over 150 countries, many of which are state sponsors of terror, streaming across the southern border in the United States, 46 million by the Customs and Border Protection's own numbers, is quite alarming. That's 1 in 7 Americans, ladies and gentlemen. 1 in 7 is an illegal invader in this country, collecting at minimum $2,200 a month of hard-earned taxpayer money. And they don't have the best of intentions, let's face it. They started off by coming here illegally. And what we're learning now is that our government is funding the United Nations, as you know, as the largest funder for the UN, which is, of course, rubber banding that money right back out, boomeranging it out through non-governmental organizations like the International Office of Migration, IOM, which is basically the shepherds of all of this mass migration around the world. You can see IOM offices everywhere. HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which is about as Hebrew as the Catholics are in Catholic charities. It's a front, a money laundering organization to move mass people around the world at, again, the expense of the American taxpayer. The people that are literally trying to come here for a better way of life are pawns, because the majority of the people here are not economic migrants. They are being used to destabilize this country, to ingratiate them into our electorate system and making them citizen voters as quickly as possible. They're using pathways to citizenship through law enforcement and the military, with military processing stations along the border near the Border Patrol, Customs and Border Protection processing stations as well. So you can imagine people coming across the border. You go here and you go over to the MEP station. I know that Daniel and you, Douglas, know what that means. They're actively recruiting people that are illegally here in this country to give them either a gun and a badge or military training and a gun, and eventually be weaponized against you, the American people. We have a crisis on our hand, and this is going to definitely impact our election. This is the number one issue for the voting public right now.
Oh, absolutely. It's the number one issue all across the United States. And sadly, no one running for office right now has given a very definitive answer. I think the closest, of course, is Donald Trump, who talks about preparing to mount the largest deportation effort in history. We'll see. Dan, you and I have defended and secured and patrolled lots of borders in the world. So you're ideally positioned to talk about this because you were on the Afghan, the Iraqi, and the Czechoslovak and East German borders. Talk to us about borders. People have said for years, you can't secure an 1,800-mile border. That's ridiculous.
Listen, I first of all, I'm really grateful to be invited on this panel, and really honored to be here among these great folks on this panel, and even more excited about being in front of people from our country, our choice, who have chosen to join this group here because they're sick of the way things are going in Washington, D.C. or elsewhere in the country. And I kind of feel like I'm part of a good group here that I feel at home at. So I'm just thankful to all of you people that are watching as well. And Roger that, Doug. I mean, we actually, one of the first times we had a chance to be on the border was in southern Iraq, where we were actually guarding against that demarcation line there. Then I actually went in 2009. I was the team chief for a border battalion where I was training an Iraqi border to defend the Iranian border. So you're right. I do have some direct experience on that. But, when it comes to this issue here in our country here, we have been talking about this my whole adult life. And rarely does the border ever get secured. Sometimes it goes up with the numbers, sometimes it goes down, but it never gets fully secured. And everybody keeps bickering about it. The Republicans, when they're in charge, say they're going to do something, they don't. The Democrats, when they're in charge, well, they used to say they're going to do something. Now they don't hardly even say that. But the bottom line is nobody secures the border. Look, if you want to have differences of opinion on what kind of border policy or immigration policies you want, you think it should be this much category of this thing or this few or whatever the numbers are, it doesn't matter. Whatever the decision is, you need to seal the damn border. It has to be secure so that whatever the laws you have are actually followed. And there's just been too little of that, whether it's been intentional underfunding or an unwillingness to put people where they need to be. But it just is crazy. And I can't hardly imagine that in 2024 in America, when we send our forces off all over the other place to help Ukraine defend their border, for example, or in Israel right now on the Hamas border, but we're not doing anything to secure our border. I thought the worst misnamed bill in American history was in, I think it was February, when we called the National Security Bill, which talked about Israel, Taiwan, and Ukraine, and nothing for American border. How do you call it a national security bill when you don't even secure your own border? That's just part of the dysfunction, which I really hope our country, our choice, is going to help find people to get into positions to fix some of these problems.
Well, I guess if nothing else, Americans are getting an education right now regarding the new Speaker of the House, who has seemingly passed over the issue of our border with Mexico and is anxious now to support Ukraine, which the Republicans at least have had the good sense to understand is in ruins, it is destroyed and has lost this war. What they need is humanitarian assistance, not weapons or money for other purposes. Well, before I go any further, I need to note that we've received some donations this evening from people watching this, and we really appreciate it. So thank you very much. Nicole, you're probably in a better position than any of us to talk about people in their 20s, people in college, university. What do they think? Are they paying any attention to this illegal immigration, or is this still, to most of them, something that happens in someone else's country or on someone else's soil in another state?
Thanks, Colonel. I'd have to say, based off my experience, depending on where you go to school really actually determines how you think and what you think in terms of the border and what is happening there. For myself, I view what's happening at the border as a crisis by design. It's an invasion on our country, and it's being facilitated by our own government. I think it's pathetic that we have not had any leaders in Congress or otherwise that have actually been willing to kind of do something about it. It's been 3 years now. And so something that I know is that it's really the Cloward Piven strategy accelerating each passing week with all the handouts and services that all of these illegals are getting. So for many in the audience, I don't expect that they would understand or know what the Cloward Piven strategy is. For those of you maybe in higher education or in the military or with military experience, you've heard of it before. But Cloward and Piven were essentially two communist professors who devised a plan to take down the capitalist structure of the United States through mass illegal migration. Their plan was to overburden the welfare system at the state level, and then essentially they eliminate states' rights. And so the federal government needs to come in and make up for that. So the 4 steps of the Cloward Piven strategy are to overload and break the welfare system. And, Anne gave us some really big numbers. They were actually higher than the numbers that I had written here on my notes. I thought the numbers were 10 million illegal migrants, mostly military age fighting males, nonetheless. But, I think her number was 46 million. So that is high. So we're definitely overloading and breaking the welfare system. I live here in New York City, and I'm filming not too far from the Roosevelt Hotel, which is literally used to house many of the migrants that are being bused here from Texas. I don't agree with the city's, plans. It's actually becoming a real problem, but, sometimes the people have to see it and they have to live it and, in order for real change to happen. So step one is overload the welfare system. Step two is to have chaos ensue. Step three is for the government to come in and essentially take control in the chaos. And then step four is for them to implement and roll out socialism and communism through government force. And we're there. So whether or not young people actually want to acknowledge, the gravity that we face, it's, really a big thing. I know people that are young, we're trying to, get through school, hopefully not have debt, buy homes. All these things are not necessarily possible when we're living in a welfare state. If you make a six-figure salary here in New York, you're still living in your parents' house. You cannot afford to go out on your own. And that is not the America we grew up on. That is not the America we knew. And it's not what our grandparents knew. And it's not, I think, what we want to leave to our future generations. So there's nothing more at stake here other than, the decisions that we make today and the leaders that we vote into office. They are going to be ultimately the ones who either lead us in the right direction or the wrong direction. And it's really important, especially for young people.
The viewers have just sent us some questions in response to the comments from all three of you. So I thought you might like to ponder these and feel free to chip in. But remember, we want to get as many people into the conversation as we can. So keep your responses fairly short. One question is, do you think that the open border policies are designed to essentially aid our disastrous foreign policy? In other words, this is by design, and this is in some way or another supporting our foreign policy. The person that wrote this pointed out that Ukrainians are now fleeing into Ireland, which is something I wasn't aware of. Another question was, why have we not heard anything about the National Security Council and its staff? It never comes up for discussion. Is there anyone paying any attention to the border crisis? And then finally, why are we paying taxes when they can simply print money? I mean, that's a legitimate question since we're passing so much of it out to illegals. So anyway, have at it. Anybody want to start the comments on those questions?
I'd be happy to. Very simply, if the federal government was working for the people, they would have stood on Article 4, Section 4 from day one, but they didn't. They let the border deteriorate to the condition that we find ourselves with it today. And that goes for the governors, because under the 10th Amendment, the states do have rights. And under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, the states can defend themselves from foreign invasion. Yet none of the governors, which are now faced with every state's a border state, because every state has got immigrants or migrants or invaders, as I like to refer to them, and many people do. They didn't stand on that either, not for 3 years, until Operation Burning Edge put so much pressure on Governor Abbott. And we met with Ken Paxton as well, providing him a lot of evidence on a lot of things related to the border, that they finally passed SB 4, which State Bill 4 didn't even need to be passed because of the aforementioned article I just said. So the fact that the government of the states and the federal government is not getting to work for the people, to protect the people and defend their constitutional God-given rights right here that are supposed to be protected by this document, it tells you all that you need to know. Yes, this is about the deterioration, and it's about global governance. They need to take America out, because the people in charge isn't our government. It's the people that they answer to, and they're after the world, as my friend Mel K says. They don't want America, they want the world, and we're in the way. So we need to wake up and recognize that they look at each and every one of us as just a funder, and yet we're expendable. So that makes us all useful idiots unless we decide to stand up.
Well, that leads to another quick question. What about elections? How do you think these illegals are going to impact the elections in the fall? Do we have any confidence that in the blue state they will be compelled to identify themselves as citizens, or will they simply be allowed to vote without proper identification?
Nicole? I'll take that one.
Yeah.
So I think election integrity has honestly been the biggest issue for me since 2020. I think what happened really was a great travesty. I think there were definitely some efforts, some of which were historic, that I think people did not pay attention to, such as the effort that Ken Paxton put together to bring the states together to, bring that case to the Supreme Court, which ultimately they dismissed for no standing. You can feel however you want about that. But I do think, I read or I saw something just yesterday that there has been 2 million new voter signups based off of, this illegal immigration, none of which were actually conducted with voter ID. I'm a poll watcher here in New York. Like, we are not allowed to ask people for ID. Basically, if you can give a name, the last 3 letters of somebody's name, and an address, you're allowed to vote. There's no other check other than that. And there's room for error and there's room for fraud, and it's rampant. And sadly, I don't think that we've really been able to make the difference in the justice system and the court system that we needed to make in order to have a real difference. So we could be leading in all of the polls, and we could have people, that are really out there and doing the right thing. But if they cheat, who cares? It doesn't really matter. What have we done to secure that? And it's hard. So when I say we're living in historic times, I really mean we're living in historic times. So the gravity of what we're living through.
I can't even understand how in the world we got to this point. I mean, you can't cash a check without, showing your ID card. You can't get into an airport without showing your ID card. Why in the world would we not have the equal thing where you have to show your ID card just to validate you are who you say you are, who is valid and authorized to cast a vote? That should be like not even negotiable or even questionable, really, because
does anybody here think that that's a racist act or an instrument of voter suppression? If you demand to know if this person is actually a legal resident,
we want to follow the law. That's all we're saying is follow the law. You vote however you want. Just follow the law.
Do you get to get your EBT card filled without an ID? Do you get to pick up checks at the welfare office without showing your ID, or that you're drug free? A lot of places drug test. I mean, what is the big deal? If you're going to have the sacred sacrosanct right to vote, you should be able to prove that you are a legitimate voter. And right now you're seeing states just sign up illegals left and right. They're testing illegal non-citizen voters in Washington, D.C. So it tells you all you need to know. They want to make that the 51st state. This is where we're at.
I think to add to that point, though, one thing that is important to mention that is the people that actually have come here from other countries and they came legally, they do not like what they are seeing. So, for example, like the Latino community that is in Southern Florida, all of them came here to escape communism. So now that it is literally on our shores and it is here knocking at our doorstep, it's they're not voting that way. That's not what they want. They literally left that to come here for a better life. So, maybe there is some hope out there that some of these people, left for a better life, but at the end of the day, most of, the statistics or what I've seen is that a lot of them are military age fighting males,
Yeah, no, I think so. We're going to close this one out and move on to the question of, are we on the threshold of nuclear war? And of course, the people asking that question are looking both at Ukraine as a place where potentially we could confront the Russians and ultimately could end up in a nuclear exchange. But there are also people very worried about the fact that the Israelis possess nuclear weapons and, depending on circumstances, could use one. In which case that would change the complexion of everything in the Middle East very quickly overnight. So, Ann, do you want to start us off and tell us what you think about that question?
Sure. I mean, let's face it, if you're after America, and I believe the people that are trying to organize all the destabilization that you see around the world are, because we have so many riches and natural resources. If you think that they have some level of sanity and they wouldn't want to at least destroy what they're ultimately after, including the Chinese, who believe they have rights to this land because they believe they're related to the Native Americans through DNA. I don't think they want to destroy this country, at least one of the countries. I don't think they want to destroy, because ultimately it's mutually assured destruction, right? And that's going to just be everybody. But you have to then go through the lens of, let's look at the people who are willing to blow themselves up, right? Put a suicide vest on and just go to town, and they have no regard for life whatsoever. So really it goes right back to the Middle East, because I don't believe Russia and the U.S. are going to point weapons at each other any more than China and the U.S. are, for the reasons that we all need each other's natural resources. Specifically, the Chinese need what we have over here. So looking in the Middle East, yeah, there's a lot to be concerned about. And the Israeli strike of the Iranian embassy in Syria is a big, big problem, in my humble opinion. That was them poking the bear. And that, again, is being organized by the very people who want to drag the United States into a world war, including Iran, which would ultimately bring in Russia. And it could escalate very quickly. But I think it's going to have to be the cooler heads in the room. And right now, if you take, Biden is a mushroom, and you look at the next person with the most influence and the adult in the room, that is Putin, because Netanyahu has genocided his population by force mandating a vaccine on people that we now know is riddled with a lot of problems. But he's, seemingly asleep at the wheel on October 7th, which, say what you want about that, that is a massive intelligence failure, or was it? And the continued escalation going on there isn't slowing down. And again, the same people that are funding our government are funding theirs, or funding the investment and the materials for them to continue that war over there. So I think that's going to be quite difficult to keep it from becoming thermonuclear. But I also think there's a lot of reasons why it shouldn't and won't go thermonuclear, because you've got some big, strong adults in the room. Maybe they're not our immediate ally, but as they say, the enemy of my enemy is my ally. And at this point, Russia makes a better ally at keeping a lid on nuclear war in the Middle East than we do, to be very frank.
Well, I've got to note your mushroom analogy. It's been a while since I heard that one, but there's no doubt that Biden is definitely in the dark, and someone is feeding him something that's not very helpful.
Right.
So, Dan, what do you think
Yeah,
about the
that's been my
nuclear
biggest
war
concern.
mess?
Even from the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, I was concerned that we may escalate and do things in there that would cross Russian red lines that could cause them to go nuclear. Fortunately, that didn't happen. And pretty much right off the beginning, we saw, okay, there are some red lines and we're not going to cross those. And things kind of settled in. Until now, it's starting to show that Russia conventionally is starting to win the war. Not starting to win the war. That really is already a concluded issue. That the war is still fighting, but it's decisively, irrevocably turned in Russia's favor. And now that that's starting to scare many in the West, because they're thinking, holy crap, we can't let Russia win. So you hear nonsense like from Macron and from Poland talking about moving troops into Western Ukraine to actually fight against Russia, which then Putin says, you do that, and it's potentially escalation, because we have to bear in mind that the Russian doctrine calls for the threshold of tactical nuclear weapons as part of their operations. It's not as far away as we might wish it. But as Doug, you and I've talked about before, any use of nuclear weapons is going to freak people out. And then you have all kinds of possibility for escalation. There is nothing in Ukraine that is risk Western and United States national security. We should bring that war to an end quickly. And I completely agree with Ann in her concerns about the Middle East, especially after Netanyahu launched that very provocative strike that's never happened before, where another country took out another country's embassy in World War I. We're talking not World War I, not World War II. Nobody has ever done that. And to the fact that Israel has done that and chosen to take out that guy in the embassy as opposed to on the way or on the way out, where it would have been less provocative, concerns me that he's trying to escalate this war and get us drawn into it. God help us if it goes nuclear, but I do have a lot of worries about that.
Well, in that connection, Nicole, one of our viewers who's watching this discussion asked a question that is it our blind, unconditional support for Israel that really puts us at risk of being drawn into what could conceivably become a nuclear confrontation? What do you think?
That is a tough question for me, and one that I usually try to, I guess, steer clear of, only because I work with people that are very, I guess, passionate and pro-Israel. And quite frankly, I just, for me, it's easier to stay out of it than get involved and really have like an opinion either way. I live in New York City, so every day there is a different protest, whether it be for pro-Israel or pro-Hamas. I mean, honestly, I went out west for vacation back in January, and it was beautiful to not have to hear a protest for 5 days. I think my comments were...
You might pause then and consider this question. And this is a legitimate question for everybody, but you might consider this, and that is, if you take an oath to uphold the Constitution and defend the Constitution, and the United States.
Mhm.
Can someone be prosecuted for deliberately not doing that?
I would say yes.
Well, it's
I
never
mean, I
happened as
think
far
there
as
are
I
plenty of
know.
people, I know, but I think people's definition of the Constitution and their ability to interpret it is really kind of become quite brazen. The Constitution, in my mind, is a very clear document that was written, very, I guess, open ended, but it's also pretty clear. And I think when you swear an oath to the Constitution and to all enemies, both foreign and domestic, I think we really need to reevaluate the people that are taking this oath because we are housing them. It's very obvious. And it's been obvious the past 4 years,
Yeah. And do you have any thoughts on that question?
Actually, I do because I've worked with a team of people that have, out of Vax Choice, lead researcher Lisa McGee has led a team. We've all contributed, but she's done the lion's share of the work for sure on doing Freedom of Information Act requests on people's oaths of office. And it started with SecDef Lloyd Austin when the jab was, being mandated on everybody in the military. And Lisa said, well, who is this guy? Let me go on FOIA for his oath and see what exactly is going on, see who he is. And they could not deliver a valid oath of office under 5 USC 3332. There's two parts of your oath. You swear with your hand on the Bible, that's 5 USC 3331, and it must be signed. And they could not produce the signed oath of office, which makes it an invalid oath. So because that was so worrisome, we decided to look at all the people in the Biden cabinet, including Kamala Harris, all in the same condition, either missing, defective, or deficient oaths of office for everybody. Then we sent a petition for a writ of quo warranto, asking by what authority that entire cabinet had to lord over us, if you will. And we sent it to U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves, who's been very involved in locking people up for January 6th. Guess what we found? He ignored us, and then we FOIA'd for his oath, same thing. Then we FOIA'd for the judge who swore in Matthew Graves, Judge Boasberg, same thing. So then it's mushroomed out and spread out across the country where oaths are being FOIA'd for sheriffs and governors and all kinds of stuff. Majoritively speaking, they're deficient. So now you have to ask yourself, is this again by design, considering that none of the governors wanted to stand up and defend the Constitution with the border invasion? Perhaps it's because they don't have to worry about treason because if they probably haven't got a solid oath of office, and if they don't have to worry about going into some sort of treasonous tribunal, perhaps maybe it's okay. It becomes a felony posing as a public officer. So this is where we're at right now. We have fraud everywhere, and we have de facto government. And I think we can agree we didn't elect a lot of these people that are sitting over there in Capitol Hill. So we have much bigger, deeper problems that we need to explore as a country, and we need to get up to speed on the Constitution, educate ourselves, and come together locally at the county level to start to remove the cancers from our municipal government, our county governments, and then go up through the state, and then eventually get to federal. But we were a union before; we can be a union again. We only wanted the federal government to help, collectively fund for our common defense and get some postal service going. So I think we really have strayed so far off the mark from what we're supposed to be that I think we need to rein it back in, but it's going to take everybody. Nobody's going to come out of this unscathed.
Well, before I turn to you, Dan, I just want to note that several people have donated $100 per person to us, and we deeply appreciate it, and we'll put it to good use. Thank you very much. Dan, you want to close us out with this and some thoughts about this issue of taking the oath and then ultimately paying no attention to your obligations to honor it?
I think Dan's on mute.
Oh, Dan, you're muted.
I'm terribly sorry.
That's much better.
Doug, when we fought in Desert Storm at the Battle of 7-3 Easting, and even backed up a little bit from that, when we took our oath of office to enter service, I thought the oath was pretty clear and pretty easy. You swore an allegiance to the United States, and so everything is cast in that regard. The Constitution, it's not hard. It's not like a law book. It's pretty small, and it's pretty straightforward what it says and what you're supposed to do, and it guides our action. But now then, the Constitution is not so much a document anymore. It's being considered as just an opinion, or that's an idea that you can do or not do. there's no clear evidence of that than the first Article 1, where the war-making powers lie. It's supposed to lie exclusively and expressly with the Congress, not the White House, not the president. They did the 1973 War Powers Act to try to reinforce that only Congress can declare war, and the president can't just take somebody into combat because he wants to. And yet every president does. And none of the Congress is turned down because they value party over the country, because they don't want whoever's in Congress isn't going to vote against the president of their party if he's violating that. And so they're going to let it go. So it's now no one even thinks about it. Everybody just says, yeah, the president can do whatever he wants for 60 days, which is a gross misrepresentation of what the Constitution and the 73 War Powers Act says. But when we make it to where it's fine to disobey the Constitution, why would we stop there? We've got to get back to an actual obeying of the Constitution, a rule of law, that the country is governed by the rule of law so that it governs everybody equally. That's the only way you have security and stability in your country. Otherwise, you have chaos where everybody does whatever's right in their own eyes.
Yeah, of course. Naturally, there are a number of district attorneys that would interpret all of that a little different from the way you and I would. And that's a problem right now with the rule of law. A veteran sent in an observation, and I just provide this as we leave this subject and move on to our final topic. He said, in the oath that you take, you swear to uphold and defend the Constitution. You also swear to obey the orders of the president and the officers appointed over you. And he's essentially throwing to sharp relief a potential conflict. What if the president is issuing orders that are inherently unconstitutional? He's sworn to uphold the Constitution, but he's also supposed to obey the orders of the commander-in-chief and his officers. I think this is going to become a large issue in the months ahead for people serving in the regular armed forces. And I just wanted to take his contribution and put that out there for your consideration. This leads us to the last topic, which is by no means the least important. In fact, it's very important for those of us in our country, our choice, because we're looking for a different way forward. The question is it time for a new third party? Have we reached the point where the two parties are so corrupted by influence and money that they are incapable of pursuing policies that are fundamentally divergent? They eventually come to agreements on things they never should. Do we need another party that will actually try to represent the interests of the American people? And you want to tackle that?
Sure. You know, it's quite interesting. We left King George III, gave him the Heisman on the way out the door, and said, we're starting over for a better way of life. We want to be able to, take advantage of God's second covenant nation and live the way God intended. And we were sick of the Tories and the Whigs, right? It just became, we lived in a feudalistic society over in the UK, Great Britain, under a tyrannical king. What did we recreate over here? The same thing, right? You can buy a house, pay off your mortgage, but you don't pay your property tax. The government comes and take it away. We're in feudalism all over again. We have two parties that have now become a uniparty. There's always been third-party candidates out there, independents, libertarians, Green Party, what have you. They haven't been successful. I'm not saying I'm against them at all. I'd like to see as much diversity as possible, because really we were a nation of ideas. We were founded on ideas, and we need to get back to those ideas and talking about the ideas that make sense so that everybody can pursue happiness, right? In terms of, what should really happen, I've been looking into an organization that I think really has come across a fantastic solution. They're called Tactical Civics. And they're talking about restoring our Congress to what it's supposed to have been. Remember, they fired up the Apportionment Act in 1929, limiting our growth in Congress to just 438 members. That's not nearly enough representation for how many millions of people we have in this country. We were supposed to have one member of Congress for every 30,000. Tactical Civics is talking about restoring it to one for every 50,000, which would increase our congressional representation to somewhere on the order of 6,600 members of Congress. And let's bring Congress home. Why do we have to coalesce in D.C., where they're obviously easily swayed by outside globalist influences that are buying their votes left and right? It's a lot easier to buy 438 than it is 6,600. So if you have your congressional member at home in his hometown and you have access to him, now he's there embedded. He knows exactly what the local issues are and can have a national impact because he represents you locally. So there's a lot more to what you can do in addition to just adding a third party. But we have to go, I think we need to go back and restructure what we were supposed to be. And then
Well,
by default, you're going to organically grow into multiple parties.
well, Ann, there are a couple of quick observations that I think are worthy of attention. One that came in from one of our viewers that said, in retrospect, George III was infinitely more tolerable, open-minded, and
Oh man.
genuinely interested in the population than the current government in Washington, D.C. And there's another thing to think about.
I agree.
We don't want to go too much further with this right now because it's off the subject. But we're dealing with a constitution that was developed in the 1780s by a group of very bright, thoughtful people for a very small country of perhaps 3 million. The country has changed a great deal. And at some point, we do need to think about a different structure and a different approach because a nation of 330 million may be too large for the kind of construct that we currently have. That's not something we want to tackle this week or this year, but it's something we have to think about in the future. Dan, tell
Yes,
us, if we're going to get a third party, what do we have to do to get it?
Yeah,
I mean, obviously it takes money. What else does it require?
Yeah, first it's got to take the will and the desire, and I absolutely agree that we need another party, another poll, because the two parties have become basically just tiny little group of elites at the top of both parties completely control the entire rest of the organization. So you literally have a handful of people that decide what this country does, what the Congress does, and individual members don't have any power over it because they get the numbers in. So then they prevent anything else from happening. I've seen this. I've seen some actually really good members of Congress, and there are some really good folks up there who want to do the right thing, and they're just crushed if they try to do anything besides do what they're told by the small number of elite. If you get another party in there, you don't even have to have a huge percentage of them. But if you have enough votes to where you can now prevent these guys from doing whatever they want, unless they also get buy-in from other people, now then you expand the realm of things that are possible and you take away that power from that ultimate elite up there. But the first thing it's going to take is a desire to do it. And I think a recognition that the two-party system, it's irrevocably broke. And I don't think it's ever going to get fixed because there's way too much power on those people's hand that they're not going to let it come out without someone prying it out of their fingers. And I think, Doug, we're either going to get there because enough people are going to coalesce around this great idea and start taking the things back in their own power and funding and supporting third-party candidates, or it's going to happen because no one does and the system collapses on itself and we have wreckage to deal with. And then we're going to have to because everybody's going to know where the fault lies from. That's what I'm afraid of.
Well, on that happy note, Nicole, you live in what is ostensibly a one-party city.
Yes.
Talk to us about the potential for a third party, given what you see.
So I think based off what I've seen at the local level outside of the city, and I know about politics, I guess, in Albany, it seems as though even if you elect local leaders who align with your values and they say all of the right things, it appears that they end up going to Albany and then they're just blockaded. They say, the governor doesn't want to hear what we have to say, or she's mean to us because, our constituents voted red. It's honestly just excuses after excuses after excuses. It's honestly the most pathetic thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And this is, grown men doing this. So for New York, I don't know really where we start because the corruption, to be honest, runs deep, and it's run deep for a very long time. If you study New York's history and where it's fallen in terms of policies, I would say we've been on the wrong side of history always. I don't think we've really had good politics in New York. I think what makes New York strong is the people here and the businesses and our resilience and our pride. But I think, for a lot of us here, it's a conscious choice to continue to stay here. And it's becoming more and more difficult. You know, most of us just stay here because our family is here, not because we want to be here. There are plenty of other alternatives and other places we can go. But we choose not to leave because we don't want to leave that family unit. You know, we still have faith. We still believe in family. We still believe in God, you know, and all these things are things that OC kind of preaches. So for me, I think a third party is a nice idea. I don't necessarily know if it's realistic, and I don't necessarily know if right now is the right time. It's very obvious that we're dealing with the uniparty, but I think there have been steps taken to, I guess, make good strides. You know, I think overhauling the RNC was a big thing. I know here at OCOC we are nonpartisan, but in terms of, you know, our viewers watching, and I've been told there's a lot here in New York. So I appreciate them all kind of supporting me and taking me up on my offer to tune in tonight. That means a lot. Thank you. But I don't know. I think the barrier to entry for a third party is very difficult. So I think we should just kind of work with what we have and move that forward. And, you know, if the time for a third party comes, it'll, I think, just kind of grow and evolve on its own. And we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But right now, in the day-to-day and in an election year, I don't necessarily know if it's like a realistic proposition for us to propose a third party. I think on the local level, what we can do is, and what I've seen, most people running for their positions locally, they run unopposed. And so I think the first order of business would be to get them opponents, you know, because elections are meant for the people to have a choice. And right now we have no choice. So I think
one of our viewers is listening to you and sent this question. The question is, are we too large, too diverse to rule ourselves effectively? Which is an interesting question. I had never thought of it in those terms, but the point is, if we cannot rule ourselves effectively, then history teaches that someone else will come in and rule us. So that's a rather frightening prospect. In the few minutes that we have left, I wonder if we could close this out with some thoughts from each of you that you want your listeners, your viewers to remember. And, you know, try to keep this short and punchy, but, you know, you reflect on what we've discussed over this hour or 45 minutes and tell us, and what do you want your viewers to remember from this discussion?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity again. It was an honor to sit down and have this conversation with the three of you. America, you're at a precipice right now, and I am a daughter of the American Revolution. I have great-grandparents who fought for the freedom that we have lived on for so long, and frankly, I think taken for granted in a lot of ways. And I feel like America needs to finally buckle up and get engaged. You know, it's one thing to be behind a keyboard and using social media and learning, but it's another thing to go and attend meetings, to go to your county commission meetings, to go to your school board meetings. And if you don't want to go by yourself, get a friend and go. You don't even have to speak, but just sit, attend, listen. Believe me, at some point you will hear something that will galvanize you into either saying something or doing something. But we have choices to make, and we need to make the choice to engage and engage civically at the local level. And if we don't start there, we really don't have any hope to stop what the federal government is doing, because they're steamrolling right on over the states, and the states are steamrolling over the counties. So we've got to build this back up county by county.
Dan, your thoughts?
You know, I there's a lot of problems in this country, and we've talked about some of them here today. But the one thing that I've noticed from the time that we served together, where we were mixed in with people from literally all over the country, and the places I've lived, is there are some great people in this country. There are some really smart people, lots of folks like many of the OCOC people that are great Americans that love the country. They love each other. And they're willing to do whatever it takes. But I think that we kind of like to echo Ann a little bit. I think it's to the point where we can't just say a lot of these things. We can't just believe them. We got to act on them, and we got to find ways to do that. But I think that if we do, and we're able to coalesce, you know, and get movement on this kind of thing, that people recognize that their actions are necessary, then I think change becomes possible, or at least improvement. But I truly do believe in the fabric of America, despite all these problems.
Nicole, you have the final word.
Okay, I mean, I think I just kind of want to touch back to what we were talking about before about swearing an oath to the Constitution. The first thing that kind of came to my mind was the Pledge of Allegiance. I feel like we are all taught the Pledge of Allegiance from a young age. I know when I was in school, we used to have to say it every day. I don't know if that is still the same thing, because I know things are changing in schools. But it really starts with our youth, and it really starts with parents, and it really starts at home. And so, instilling those values, I think, is really the first step in kind of breeding and bringing up, young patriots and people that are passionate about this country and love it as much as we do. And there unfortunately has been a whole generation that has been brainwashed to hate this country. And so we have to work hard, and we have to work diligently to kind of reverse that. And I think the first step is, teaching people to say the Pledge of Allegiance and understanding what it actually means. I know myself on my walk to work every day, I usually am in passing, going past the UN. And what I do in my mind is I always put my hand over my heart and I always say the Pledge of Allegiance, because I think, when you pledge to the flag of the United States, it means something. It's not just empty words. Like, the ideals and the gifts that we were given by our founding fathers are not insignificant. It really is the greatest country on earth, and we are really in very dire times. So we need all of the, young people and old people alike to really just get back to understanding that we are way more powerful when we are united. And right now, everything that they're trying to do is just to divide us. It's actually, I guess it's part of the playbook per se, but most people are so enamored by this propaganda that we see that, they don't have the foresight to see through it for themselves. So I think kind of going back to the basics and bringing it back to the Constitution, the Pledge of Allegiance, the national anthem, the things that unite us and make us Americans.
Well, Nicole, that's a good wrap up. I want to thank everyone this evening that's participated in this discussion. I especially want to thank our members who have donated to us during this hour. These donations are very important. They help us to bring you programs like this, Evening Insight, and other events in the future, particularly as we get closer and closer to the fall. So we really appreciate it. Here at Our Country, Our Choice, love of country leads. To some, that may seem corny. To us, it's fundamental. And America needs our love and protection now more than ever in its history. So, Ann, Dan, Nicole, thanks a million. We'll see you all again, I'm sure, in the future. Thank you, everyone in Our Country, Our Choice, and those who are viewing. Good night.